All right, we are recording. So welcome to this Data Champions online discussion. We're going to be focusing on UKCF and data sharing. But before we do that, I'd love to get the check-in on the roll call. So Andy, let me put the link into the text box. And if you could do us a favor, and Gareth, when you do have a moment, actually, it'd be just, I'd like to be sort of checking in with people in terms of current priorities you're working on and current priorities that you are focusing. So just to say on that document, you will note Steve and Nicola have done me a huge favor by already entering in their priorities and challenges for what they're doing in terms of data work. And so we'd love to fill that in so we have some documentation of where people are at as we do this calls and how things are progressing. Just to get in that, let me just start from the beginning. Stephen, do you want to just do a quick overview of what you have there?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I think what I've noticed over the past couple of weeks and being obviously involved with this is that we're really very early on in our start of our data journey. So I actually don't think we know what questions we need to ask it. So therefore, we've got lots of data. We've always captured data and numbers and amounts and dates and all sorts of stuff. But actually, does it really tell us anything? So having been at an event with 360 Giving on Monday, I realised quite quickly that we really need to figure out what the questions are first, and then figure out how we get the data together to provide the answers to those questions. The challenges of that are that, yes, you can capture data, we can ask people for all manner of numbers and record stuff, but actually then making sense of that afterwards can be a real problem if you didn't figure out what the question is in the first place. And also, it's become quite apparent to me recently that we can't place too much of a burden both on ourselves in just capturing data for data's sake, but also on the grant recipients that we are asking for that information. So if you're giving someone £1,000 and asking them to fill out 4 sides of A4 just to tell you how they spent it, you've got to think that through very carefully, because people are going to stop asking you for money, which breaks the whole community foundation model really for us. So yep. That's what I was saying.
That's great. Just to note, Andy, I just put you on mute because you seem to have a lot of background noise, and I'll get you to come off mute in a second. But Nicola, do you just want to share with us your priorities and challenges, what you're working on right now?
Sure. So I've put down here that I've literally just about half an hour ago published a whole bunch of needs analysis reports to the rest of the foundation. And I'm interested, first of all, I'm happy to share those if they'd be of interest to anybody else to look and see what we do. But also I'm sort of interested in trying to collect some feedback from people on whether or not they use them at all, what they use them for, and try to sort of modify that model going forward. So I'll be kind of pressing people for feedback on that and kind of honest accounts of that over the next couple of months or so, I suppose, to build up a picture of what it's doing and how beneficial, because it took a huge amount of work to do it, and I'm pleased with the outcome, but if it isn't useful to people, then it was a bit of a waste of time. So that's that one. And just to add to that, I didn't write it down, but I've also fairly recently produced a sort of report on various different aspects of analysis of our grant making distribution side of things rather than the impact side of things. And that was useful to inform a conversation with one of our trustees who has a responsibility for grants on the board recently, which meant that we could focus our conversation very specifically on a couple of trends that we'd noticed within that document. I was slightly nervous, I have to say, about sharing that with her, because there's a tendency for graphs to breed more requirement for more graphs, and that I thought that I might just end up with a whole pile of requests for other elements that I'd not included in that analysis. But actually it was a really useful basis for a conversation about why this might be the case and if it was something that was desirable and what we might do about it going forward. So it's kind of a good news story, I suppose, is the point there. And then very, very briefly, the final thing is a piece of qualitative work that I'm about to do, which will inform the programme development of a new programme we're working on associated with Sport England, to do with increasing physical activity in Exeter, and that's going to be doing some analysis which is based on case studies but which draws from the individual case studies into looking at some broader qualitative models of successful community engagement, and it's not something I've done exactly in that way before, and certainly I haven't done it to fulfill such a specific strategic purpose before. So again, I'm sort of slightly nervous about how the powers that be who are working on this project with us and who are much more used to quant evidence are going to receive that, but I'll let you know.
Good luck with that. That sounds very good. Andy, I'm going to unmute you. Do you mind just sharing current priorities, what you're working on, and challenges briefly?
Yeah, I think for us it's been interesting doing these sessions, and I think it is a realization that we need to probably take a couple of steps backwards and just review our most important tool, I suppose, which is our digit sales per force database and how we're using that, which most community foundations use. There's sort of realization that very few of us have actually had any sort of training or anything in it. And so questions about how, whether we're actually using it in the best possible way, or whether we're just sort of bodging things the way we think they should be done. So I think that's the sort of step we're looking at the moment, and we're looking to sort of get some training in around that just to bring everyone back up to speed. So it's a little bit of sort of going back to basics, I think, before going forward again. I think part of that is going to be reviewing what the data that we're asking grant applicants to provide. As I'm aware at the moment, we don't necessarily use everything. So we're really just asking questions for the sake of asking them, and then, we're not using it for anything particularly. So I think it's a sort of back to basics exercise for us, actually.
Cool. Gareth, in terms of before we get into your UKCF and data sharing, did you want to just briefly talk about what your current priorities are and challenges?
I mean, the challenges will definitely fit into what we're doing in terms of what I'm going to be talking about. But I'm not really sure. I feel like we do a lot of firefighting to a certain extent in terms of trying to get data off Salesforce that we can use. That is technically there, but we either can't access it and so this has been the case for the I Will program we've been doing. I don't know whether I mentioned this before. We've been doing a lot of end of year reconciliation stuff, and I obviously haven't been involved with this before because I'm new to the organization. So it's easy for me to kind of see where there's been holes and where there's been issues, and it's easy for everyone to see. But we've kind of learned very well from what's happened, and I feel that we're prepared in a kind of problem-solving way to deal with the new round. But that learning, I wouldn't have come to this conversation with the same questions and queries and thoughts if I hadn't have gone through that work. It's been quite satisfying because we've got a lot done, and we've definitely found what we needed, and we've definitely learned a lot from it. But it was a lot of work to try and get things together when essentially the real element of Salesforce that should work is that all the data's there and we should just be able to pull it off. It shouldn't be lots of manual manipulation of data, which it was. So that would definitely contribute to what I'm going to talk about today.
Great, super helpful. And just to say that, what I've sort of heard from all four of you, there's definitely this issue in terms of what is actually useful for people, right? And I think this piece we keep this idea that we need to constantly be understanding how people are interacting and using the data and figuring out what is actually useful to them, right? And so this piece, both in terms of like what questions are we asking, is a major piece, but then it's like, how are we answering the question? And then, who are stakeholders that we need to be presenting these answers to, and what's the best way to be communicating, the data to them and all that. So anyways, lots of fine different ways to cut things. So just to say the way that the rest of this call will work is we're now going to go into Gareth talking a bit more deeply about UKCF and what they're doing with data sharing, or how they're grappling with data sharing. Sorry. After that, we'll also do a quick review of, are there any good resources or tools that have come up for this? Is there anything we could be contributing to the resource library? I will then also want to see if we have a good topic or volunteer for the next online discussion. And then I'll talk briefly about the face-to-face workshop. More will probably be jumping on at some point, and might be possibly giving us an input and some updates on what is happening with 360 Giving. So that's the agenda for today. And with that, also just to say, I had a slight ulterior motive in pointing you all to the Google Doc. So both to say, Andy, if you can put your stuff in the Google Doc when you have a chance, that would be helpful. But also, if you can help me take notes during this, I am forever grateful for that. So with that, Gareth, what was that thing you just had in your hand?
It's the air conditioning and the heating in this place is a nightmare. It's either too hot or too cold, and everyone's suffering from illnesses, which I think is airborne viruses being distributed by the air conditioning system. So I was just sorting that out anyway. I might be fiddling around a little bit more.
That's more than fine. I was like, does he have some presentation going on?
Yeah, no.
Or something that is going on.
It's just a horrible wall with lots of blue tack on the back as well. So, so I'm ready to go. Yeah. Do you want me to just jump off? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think because this could definitely turn into on my part, like just a kind of a whole discussion about either how community foundations can input data better, or how we can access the data better, or and there's always a lot of potential, but there's definitely elements where there's troubleshooting to deal with. So I think I wanted to start with something a bit more positive and just look at the fact that we have the potential to be a GDR compliant, and that was obviously important, but a GDR compliant repository for a huge amount of data across all of the community foundations. That could be really useful to kind of signpost our way to new opportunities, or could be kind of an area of data that could be used for a whole myriad of reasons. And in saying that, I also do definitely want to agree and acknowledge that we don't want to just collect data for data's sake, that we may use it one day, and that it should be stored indefinitely and never kind of got rid of, or and storing everything to the point that we just could access everything. We do need a focus on that, but we're a whole range of very skilled and kind of very well connected groups throughout the whole of the UK that should theoretically be gathering lots of data about their individual regions and the needs and the issues that are kind of affecting people in those regions, and the successes and the results and the impact that could be used in a much more kind of connected way, I think. And while there may be some community foundations doing that individually within their own areas and within their own organizations, it would be kind of the dream here that we had, again, GDPR compliant and, kind of like useful data that we could use to help the community foundations do their work, help the people that they're working with, identify new opportunities and for funding and for gaps in services and things like that, and rather than just have a lot of kind of information that's we talk to the community foundations. We know that they know what's going on in their regions, but it would be just so much easier if we were able to access useful data. So I think that there's a massive amount of potential there, And I think that there's an element where we will need to ensure that if we're using Salesforce, that it works, in a kind of efficient way, to allow us to do that. But then also make it as easy as possible for everyone to be either inputting data that we need to prove, results to national funders, or, just to even allow us to kind of be self-evaluative of our own work and kind of look at what we're doing in these larger programs, regardless of whether or not we need to prove certain things to certain funders. But looking at that, there are obviously a lot of pressure points and issues related to this data. And I talked earlier on, or started to talk about the whole thing that I've been going through with iWill. Some of that is certainly the foibles of the program. Some of it is certainly the way that the program was run and kind of kept tabs on over the period. So what's happened is that we've ended up having to scrabble a lot of data together at the very end of the program, which luckily has revealed that we're kind of just about at the amount of money that we should have spent contractually for to satisfy iWill and the lottery. But I mean, there was a period where we were really having to scrabble together to try and find all of the money that had been spent, all the grants that had been made, all the data that had come back from that. And I think as I said, we've created now a much more kind of conducive structure for that program going forward, with an idea that we'll be able to pull in all the data we need. We'll have to have some kind of input from the community foundations at certain times through the year to ensure that we know how much has been given and how much match funding has been raised and stuff. But theoretically, a lot of that should also be able to be done on Salesforce. So I know some community foundations use Salesforce really effectively and really well. We don't here. We don't use it well at UKCF. We do not run the national programs through it beyond gathering the data from the community foundations. So, and as I said, with iWill, that wasn't even that reliable anyway. There was a lot of cross-checking that had to be done, and I didn't feel very secure with the data. So, to be transparent, that's how I feel. We should be using Salesforce in a more effective way. And with Steve, we're looking at options for that through the Maximising Technology Committee, which is obviously looking to make all of these things much more effective and streamlined and user-friendly. So, I think I have a few questions. I have a few questions for the people there that maybe do, or the reps from the CS that do have a sense of grant making, but obviously, they're questions like, is it easy to kind of input the data that we need to prove results to national funders? Do the community foundations always know why we need that information? And it's good that we're all UKCF obviously isn't a grant maker, but most of us here have grant making backgrounds or have been involved with grant makers. And so it is nice that we're asking for data that we know that the community foundations will either be able to use themselves or will know why we need it. I've worked in a few organizations where you're working with grantees who just have no idea why you need that data, and it's very difficult to then motivate them to give it to you or to submit it, because they don't really understand what impact it will make, beyond the fact that they just think it's a kind of a hoop jumping exercise to prove that they've used the money effectively. So, we do have a lot of benefits in that regard, in that we're not kind of we're preaching to the choir to a certain extent, but it's just whether or not there's capacity to kind of submit data. There's capacity and time to engage with the with the data entry that's needed. Whether the stuff that we need is always useful to the community foundations as well, because obviously we would hope that it would be. But with national program funders, they can often ask for things which are very specific to their own programs and may not bear much relevance to the kind of data that the community foundations collect. So at the risk of kind of waffling on without kind of too much of a focus, I did talk to my colleagues here, and I got some kind of feedback from from them in terms of some very practical elements of data recording into Salesforce. And then just some sense of, so I think I got some good questions from Vicky, as you probably expect. She often has quite a kind of detailed perspective on things. So one of the questions she's asked was, she would be interested to try and understand why we seem to have so much trouble with collecting data from the community foundations, and how people may be able to envision us configuring the system to allow us to help gather that data, as I said, across the network, and kind of divide it up and silo it in terms of themes, geographies, outcomes, demographics, that kind of thing, and how we can use that data to then better understand why we're making grants and to whom, and whether they, those grants are effective, and how we can use that learning to also then help the grantees that we're working with, or that the community foundations are working with. She's talked about targeting cold spots, and where are there gaps in grant making, in terms of geography and themes and things like that, especially when looking at very specific local need. So if I think one of the, again, to go back to potentials, if UK Community Foundations was able to pull that kind of data effectively and use it well in a kind of 360 giving model, we would be able to go to large national program funders and kind of, be much more placed to say, we are experts on what's going on. We have this perspective across the whole of the UK. You can trust us that we know where the money would be best spent, or we have identified these areas where money isn't being spent or provision isn't being provided, and why don't we look to fund in these areas? That should then, by default, support the community foundations to get the money to where they need it, not mean that they're kind of being involved in programs that either aren't needed in their area, or or even that are oversubscribed. So I think there's opportunities there again. And I don't really want to go, because we could go into kind of really specific issues that we have about the way that some data is entered. But I think that's that's not necessarily something we need to do here. It's something we need to think about, and something that we could have a chat offline, or you can ask specific questions. I can even kind of publish up some questions and see if people have a perspective on it. But I know that not everyone on this call will maybe work in inputting data anyway. So there's lots I could talk about, but I don't know whether anyone has any comments or.
Yeah, it's good to, I think, pause and see if there's any.
Yeah, there's a lot. I just dumped a lot there. So,
Gareth, if I may, does UKCF know what data it needs? As in, are we talking about organisation name, postcode, amount, theme? Does it know what data set it actually needs? Because I think that comes back to the same question I said at the beginning, in that we don't necessarily know until someone asks the question what question we're going to be answering.
Yeah, I think
I would have thought that Salesforce must have enough fields within it to capture the data that we need to report on. And then actually what we're looking for is a way of sharing that data with you in a consistent manner. But if there is data that we're not even capturing yet, then that's a whole different question. I'll stop talking now.
Yeah, I think because I've just been putting together the I Will application form, and so the original application form was quite a broad thing, and it asks the same questions as we always tend to ask. The I Will group want very specific answers to things that then fit into their new IMS, so their new version of Salesforce or whatever, which is causing problems because of the field issues as we've had before. But I have spoken to Emma, and she is finding ways around that. So I think we always know what the funders want to know. So we always have that talk. It's either that they just aren't really bothered and they allow us to kind of just gather the same stuff that we always gather, and that community foundations generally gather to prove impact anyway. But I think, we definitely don't know what we want in terms of, I have a good idea of what we could use for the deeper analysis and the wider analysis of stuff. And I think we do collect that. I mean, I think it is on Salesforce. It is there because we're collecting beneficiary data. We're obviously, the new impact elements are coming into play, and they've already been involved, but in a slightly different way. I mean, there are elements where you've got a lot of narrative responses to monitoring forms, which are obviously very difficult to navigate. Although, for example, for the I Will fund, we were given money as part of our responsibilities, or part of our contract, to bring in an external an analyst to do a whole load of work on the narrative and case study elements. So they literally were sent the dump of data that's all through the more narrative parts of the monitoring, and they are doing their own work on that. So there is the opportunity for us to do that. I don't know. This is the point, I suppose. In Vicky asking these questions, it's whether or not we can just access that data well and effectively, which at the moment I don't feel confident in doing, and I don't think there's anyone at UKCF that has those skills to kind of like really start to drill down, because the reporting element of Salesforce is so turgid that I just don't really know always whether we're looking at the right places. And we talk to Hyphenate and they say, just start as simple as possible, and you start and then you don't get the data you want, and you're never really sure whether you've got all of, especially for I Will, which has got over 1,000 grants. We weren't even really sure whether we were getting, we would run a report, tweak something, and we would get 200 more grants suddenly. And it was like, well, we don't even know how many grants there were in total. Surely Salesforce should be telling us there were 1,400 grants made under I Will, but it wasn't doing that. And so we'd get a different number each time. And Hyphenate were just saying, well, if you put in the report, you'll get all of them, and that should be all of them. And I was like, well, but we change one thing and we get a whole nother raft of grants, So I'm not really confident that we have the reliable access to that data, which is why we need to troubleshoot and sort out something systemically to enable us to feel that we're getting the most amount of data out. Because at the moment, I think there's an element, and this is very pertinent to this discussion, that because there are so many community foundations presenting so much similar information, it doesn't always get inputted in exactly the right way, and so bits get left out. If it was one person inputting 1,000 grants, then you could be more confident that they may, although obviously that's a lot of work, so let's say 250 grants, that they have inputted them all in exactly the same way, with exactly the same indicators and exactly the same, even just literally they've put them under the same program in Salesforce. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes they aren't linked through to us. Obviously, we can't see everything. We can only see things that you allow us to see. So there are lots of very technical considerations. I think you're talking more about, to a certain extent, the preparation for accessing that information, which could definitely do with some work as well.
I'm just feeling a lot of pain for you now at the moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, the potential is definitely there, and the test will be this time next year if the I Will data, because we've come at it really head on and we've gone, right, this didn't work last year, we're going to do this, this, and this now. If that works, and we're confident, because so for example, one key way will be that we'll keep a log of all of the grants made separately, but this is the thing, we have to do this off Salesforce. We have to keep a log of every community foundation is going to have to say how many grants they made, and then we'll compare that with Salesforce. And if at the end of the year that doesn't marry up, then there's something wrong with Salesforce, because at the moment we're having to do it manually and automatically, and that kind of seems ridiculous.
I definitely think there's something to be done about consistency, because I think I have looked at your data, and I Will is in there in quite a variation of spellings, if nothing else. And I don't want to sort of leap to too many solutions, but knowing things like 360 Giving that provides a data quality upload tool, so you get the data out, you upload it to a system, and it tells you everything that's wrong with it, does seem like a possible way of starting to manage things like this, but that may be much further down the line.
That's good to know stuff out there. And it's very easy for me to get bogged down in kind of going like, now we're only talking about I will and complaining about, you know, these very specific things. But I think there is definitely a conversation that needs to be had about what's the strategic, and I'm trying to think of the word, because it's like a kind of, so people did talk about, so I think at the next grants meeting, which is in April, there's going to be a whole kind of discussion about principles of grant making. So what are the principles of grant making, and do we share those principles across all of the community foundations, and how can we be, you know, all together on the same page? But when I talked about coming to talk here, Lily suggested that we also need a principles of data gathering, you know, and that everyone agrees where possible that you know, that we're doing this thing, you know, either very practically or even just very kind of like, not ethically, but you know, methodologically, that we're all kind of coming at it from the right perspective, and that we understand why we're gathering data, we understand why it's important to do that, we understand what's not important, as you said, you know, like not to gather the stuff we don't need. Because I mean, when I was at my first grant meeting, which I think was the end of August, I'd only been here for a couple of weeks, I sat on I hosted or chaired a breakout session that was all about impact, and a good percentage of the community foundations there said they gather data, they don't look at it ever, because they can't, because they don't have time. So you know, there's obviously a massive issue there, and everyone collects data differently, and everyone accesses it and engages with it differently as well. So if we have this kind of sense of the principles of data gathering, then at least there's an agreement at the beginning, and people then choose to follow those or not. But they need to be democratic, obviously.
But also it comes down to really good case studies of showing, well, if you do record things consistently and output them consistently, then this is what you should be able to achieve with it. So yeah, I definitely think there's a need to communicate better what goes wrong if data isn't consistent. I mean, there's only so much you can do when you're dealing with foundations that may be, hello, if you stop moving.
Hang on. The light's gone totally off in here. Hang on. There we go. Obviously, it was sitting very still. Yeah.
So yeah, if you're dealing with foundations that maybe only one or two people have got completely different time pressures and whatever, then it's more of an issue. But you still have to tell people why you're asking for this information that may seem to be a pain for them. Yeah.
And ultimately, I mean, I'm not sure if anyone on this call has been chased by Tatty about the I will stuff, but she had to, I mean, it was a lot of work for her, and that was fine. But obviously we understand it's a ton of work for the community foundations to be chased over and over again to kind of say, well, what grants have you made? You know, you still haven't got back to us about what grants you made. You know, do you know which grants you made? You know, ultimately it's a huge amount of work for them to have to chase that themselves. So it's not, you know, it's pain felt everywhere, and they may get annoyed by it, but ultimately, you know, it was written into the contract that kind of data and information was needed to be gathered. And so we would always hope to try and make it as easy as possible for that data to be gathered, because otherwise, obviously, we're making a massive hardship for everyone involved anyway.
Mm-hmm. Great. Just to say hi to Moore, who has just joined us. Andy or Nicola, do either of you have any questions or comments at this point?
I was just going to say, I mean, it's on the I Will Fund again, I suppose. But I mean, I spoke to Tatiana when she was chasing up the grants. And as far as we were concerned, we'd done everything we were asked to do. And, you know, the fields were sent across. It was all set up. You know, as far as we were concerned, we'd sort of done everything we were told to do. And then half the grants seemed to be missing. So I was able to sort it out with her, but couldn't understand why that happened. You know, but yeah, from our point of view, it felt like we were following what we've been asked to do, but it obviously didn't work. So yeah, that was a problematic one for sure.
And the whole point is that, I mean, it's really not about apportioning blame on any one individual or any one community foundation for not submitting. And that's what the problem is. That's what it often sounds like when someone's chasing. It's like, why haven't you submitted this? You know, I've chased you 3 times. It's like, we understand it's so difficult and so complicated. And sometimes it's just Salesforce not doing what it should be doing. And I think it's that kind of, because the danger would be is to have larger conversation like this, and then all the community foundations kind of feel like we were attacking them for not doing what they needed to do to allow us to report back to program funders and things. But that's not, I don't want to do that, because I've got no interest in shouting or trying to get, because it just won't work. But it's just got to be easier for everyone, because the potential time saving, and also the potential of all of this data being accessible is much bigger. I mean, there are very few organizations that have this kind of perspective on grant making on such a wide range of areas, for such a wide range of things as well. We're not just doing one thing. We're not one type of charity. We have a perspective on a whole range of things. So
yeah, I think for us, I mean, so few of us here ever had training in digits to start with. Whenever it was introduced, how many years ago? It was before my time.
Yeah.
And, most of us here now never got training. So you just kind of work it out. And there's that sort of fear that, we talked about sort of data quality and consistency and so on. Well, not really sure that's now in place. So I do feel there's a need for us to kind of go back and have that sort of grounding in best practice, if you like.
Yeah.
And I wonder how common that experience is across the network, to be honest.
Yeah. And I think that realistically, and I'm not sure what's, there are issues with the Salesforce system that may require solutions, that will make it different to how it is now. So it might even be that, you could be trained and then things might have to change regardless anyway. So, but there are simple things that you can be aware. Like, so I think one of the things that Tatiana actually did send me was that we can't always see everything that the community foundations have theoretically attributed to programs that we're kind of helping to coordinate. And so there must be just a way to do that. There must be so everyone should at least know that when you do these things, it brings it through to a UKCF program. And if people don't know that across the network, then should be a fairly simple kind of tutorial. The fact of the matter is that I have no idea how to do that, because I don't have to do it. But also I should have a perspective on how that's done, so that if anyone ever, kind of asks or needs the help, we can provide it. So we certainly are definitely not perfect in terms of upskilling and knowing. We defer to Hyphenate way too much, I think.
Yeah, I mean, our intention at the moment, just so you're aware, and this really came from our last webinar a couple of weeks ago, is we've asked Hyphenate for how much does a day's training cost. They haven't got back to me 10 days later, but hopefully they will. And the idea is that we will invite other Southwest foundations.
Okay.
And we will have 1 or 2 people from each and bring everyone together. And we thought that would be quite a nice way of doing it, because it's difficult for us down here to get up to London or whatever. Yeah. And so that's our thinking at the moment, but we haven't really gone through what the content of that day might be, but it's really just that sort of idea of a refresher and best practice, I think.
It might be useful if you do get a date set in for that and I'm available. It might be useful for me to come down as well, because I've definitely
good.
That. And also, if people have questions that would be better for me to answer, or kind of procedural stuff which Hyphenate, because Hyphenate don't really have a perspective on the programs. They just know how things should fit together, So it might be a bit me walking into the lion's den type thing, but I'd be willing to kind of come down and have a chat, and I'd probably gain a lot from it as well.
Okay, that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think if you do have, and I haven't had Hyphenate training, but I think if you do get Hyphenate training, it may be quite generic. It'll tell you what the fields do, but it won't. I think it is going to be vital for UKCF to get a handle on, in order for us to get this data. These 3 or 4 fields have to be populated in this way, and that has to go out at the beginning of any new program.
Yeah.
So if this isn't done in this way, we won't see anything. But you have to get a handle on that, and I don't. Between us, I'm sure we can get to that.
Yeah. So there's a very specific example in terms of that certain things aren't filled in, so we can't report back. I've found that on the when I pulled off iWill reports, there are lots and lots and lots of, there's tons of monitoring that hasn't been submitted across the whole network. That's overdue by a year in some instances. There's also, when that monitoring has been submitted, there's no beneficiary numbers, things like that. So it's just interesting that I mean, some of those grants are not massive, so I understand, you know, that as you said, that you can't ask them to fill in pages and pages of reporting. You know, but there are key things that we need, which is number of beneficiaries, not, you know, like, and that's probably because on the monitoring form it wasn't required, which obviously is a failure of the original design of the monitoring. So I've literally been ticking like required for everything, you know, and then the narrative stuff is important, but ultimately we need these certain things to report back to I will, and they must be filled in. So again, that's another question to have. Maybe we'll even have to do we did have one webinar, but we needed probably another webinar once we've much more clear on what's actually been submitted, because we can kind of then come and say, well, look, most of this monitoring hasn't been submitted. Is this what you think? Is this how you see it? And then when the community foundations either say, no, actually it has been submitted, that's where we're missing it on Salesforce, or they're like, oh shit, yeah, it hasn't been submitted. So, and I'm definitely not, I'm not going to make a judgment on which one that is at the moment.
Nicola, did you have any questions or comments?
I did, but they're not to do with I will data entry.
That's fine.
I'm afraid,
that's fine.
because I don't do that, and so I'm not really qualified to comment. My responses were really to do with the things I think that you think Vicky had fed into the conversation, which were about how useful it is to be able to do things like kind of pull out information to be able to share with potential funders. And to look at issues like cold spots and these sort of more general issues rather than specific reporting on grants, which is what you've been discussing till now. And I'm slightly playing devil's advocate because I have been on the receiving end of last minute requests from Vicky about you know, detailed analysis of grant funding on, you know, kind of one-legged football players in you know, this or that, and having to kind of scramble to produce that information. But on the other hand, I'm slightly concerned that, you know, if we do actually ever finally nail the Salesforce data entry question, there is a danger of over-reliance on the information which is contained within Salesforce, which is sort of data, if you like, which bypasses and devalues the knowledge which is held within the community foundation about these issues in general. And in particular, you know, an example is the cold spots issue. You know, you might do a delightful piece of mapping which identifies what you see as a cold spot. But there might be very good reasons for that. There might be, for example, in our patch, in very rural areas, it can look as if absolutely zero is going on in huge chunks of the country. But actually that's because of a concentration of activity within market towns to which people travel to attend activities, and it isn't necessarily a problem. It's the place-based knowledge is what underlines that, and so I think we should sort of be aware of the difference in a sense between data and knowledge, and not to elide the two. And you know, if we ever do get to this mythical point where Salesforce data is reliable, we shouldn't assume that's the whole story, and that the CF's narrative is equally important.
Yeah, I agree totally. Yeah, really good point, and definitely is only one element of a much. That's I suppose that's my point in saying that I did want to kind of, you know, make sure that I kind of put in the fact that we know that the community foundations are are experts in grant making in their areas and the need in their areas, and so that was definitely intended to be in there to kind of make it clear that it's not about, you know, kind of overriding or kind of avoiding having to talk to you know, the people that are on the ground and you know, able to kind of give a very real perspective on things. I personally can say that I would never access that information with the idea that you're then going to go to a funder and say, look at this, you know, this is the situation, without it being kind of a nuanced kind of element of a much wider discussion with either the community foundations of that region or you know, or the people that we know have a really good perspective on the need and things like that. Because it's just, I mean, this is the whole thing, I suppose, is that you know, data is such a key thing, and impact is such a massive thing to be looking at, and it is really important and really beneficial, but it's only one element of grant making and charitable work and third sector, you know, kind of perspectives. I think that sometimes grantees especially can get really annoyed with the kind of focus on impact without, because they're not kind of being just, engaged with it in a way that they're actually gaining anything from it. They're just inputting tons and tons of stuff, and then they don't hear anything back. I used to do it in my old job. We used to ask for tons. I used to work with teachers. We used to ask for loads of data to be submitted, and then when it came in, it was so much work for me to wade through it. I'd often say thanks very much for submitting, and they wouldn't hear from me again. And I had a couple of comments where they'd be like, "We don't even know what you do with that, and we don't even know how we've done. Like how did we do that year?" And a lot of them, it was a very kind of, it had a big social element of getting kids off the streets and things like that. So they knew that they were doing that. They were very confident about those elements. But they kind of wanted to know, well, you're gathering all this data, which theoretically is being used in a kind of expert way, which may or may not have been being used in an expert way in our end. But, so can we get a perspective on that? And, and that was definitely a regret that I kind of had in my last job, that we didn't have the time to do that, essentially.
Oh, just apropos to that, as I say, I'm not really closely involved with the I Will stuff, but my ears did prick up when you talked about this analyst person that you'd paid to do some qualitative analysis of some of that work. Is that something that we can have access to? Where is that?
It's not finished yet, so
yeah, we'll get to see it though.
Definitely. Yes, there's no. It's your data, it's your information. So there's no reason why it wouldn't be then shared. It's not come back as yet because obviously he's got the job of going through over 1,000 records of narrative data to try and pull a grand narrative together. So I don't know who that person is, but it's not a job that I would want to do. So definitely yes. But you're right. Like those kind of things should always be shared and should always be disseminated, in the most effective way. So that will definitely happen. But I'll make a specific note to talk to Lily about that as well.
Thanks.
Great. Any other questions and comments on this before I move us along? Yes.
The only thing I was going to say, having now Moore's on the call, I was at the 360 Giving event on Monday afternoon, and we were laid down a very specific challenge by Lloyds Bank Foundation to say that he'd got examples of organisations that had to employ a single individual just to fill out the data collection for their grants. 17 funders, 17 different data sets being collected. So Gareth said it as well, and I think it just pricked my conscience that actually just capturing data without really asking the organizations what they already have and how they're proving to their trustees and to their beneficiaries that they're actually achieving their objectives is something we need to think about, because otherwise we'll go so far down the road of just capturing data for our own ends, forgetting actually that it is the beneficiary that's the customer and not us really in this process.
We're experimenting with you asking some of our multi-year grantees not to complete, in this case, interim reports, but to just submit to us the evaluation materials that they would do anyway, plus some excellent case studies, and then to have a kind of project visit, so no extra paperwork at all. So we'll see if that works. How on earth we're going to kind of square that with Salesforce is something I've not yet thought about, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is that like if you don't need to square it with Salesforce, if it isn't, if the data is, you can put it in, but then you don't want to be doing that kind of really good, kind of on the ground visits and things like that, and then someone else has to come back and put stuff into Salesforce, write it up, because it does need to be recorded somewhere, but how do you record it best so that it's not just writing reams and reams of narrative reports that no one reads then? It's...
So something that my funder, because I have an organization that I volunteer with, and we have an American funder named the Hewlett Foundation, and some of the stuff that they experiment with is actually asking the grantees to have blog posts So basically, they're making sure that the blog posts are really reflective. So it's not like, hey, look, we've done all this amazing work. And the blog posts are also there to other people to see, not only the grant maker, but the grant maker also to understand what's going on. I do acknowledge that you can't do it with all the grantees because some of them are really afraid to share, but knowing that a lot of them do want to have some kind of a comms perspective so other people will know their work, asking them to write some of the narrative reports in a way of a blog post can help them actually to do that in a way that can be beneficial for them and for you. So just an idea. Thinking also of the conversation that Port Street had on Monday. Yeah, Hewlett found it very useful. But again, it's like also some kind of a conversation between the grantee and the grant maker to make sure that this is the right path for that specific grantee. Just a trial.
Yeah.
Great. Anything else?
Just very briefly, just to say that the question of how we present qualitative material so that it is retrievable and searchable and easily navigable is a question I've been asking since the beginning of time, really, within this post, and I think it's a serious one. I haven't got any closer to answering it, but as a kind of as someone with a background in qualitative research, I don't think it's a reason not to do it. But the problem is, as long as it remains not retrievable and not easily accessible, unless you pay some analyst to sit for hours in a darkened room, it will remain the second-class citizen in terms of evidence, and that is the problem.
Yeah.
Cool. I wanted to point out, so in terms of a resource that you might all find super helpful in this area, week before last, as part of my network-centric resources project, I had Greg Bloom from Open Referral talk about how he's done a bit of community organizing with health and human service providers on sharing data about their services so that they can be better at providing information to their beneficiaries in terms of what is available and what is out there in terms of this stuff. And the problem that he was trying to solve when he started 10 years ago was he knew that he was working in a service provider that was collecting its own database about other service providers, and then realized that every service provider was doing that, was creating their own database, and being so that they could do this referral business. The interesting bit, the things that really, basically what he did was he went around and just engaged every service provider that he could in terms of how would sharing data be valuable, and what could they do. And some of the stuff that he did very quickly and early on was like, did principles and values for the data that they were collecting. I'll share the link, and I have to say that if you guys can get through, there's a video that we did. He did a presentation on his work that is probably the first 20 minutes. It's well worth sitting through to get that understanding of it isn't just about saying we need this, right? You have to give us this information, but this sort of more community organizing aspect in terms of getting everybody on board on why are we asking to have this data? Why, what is the point of it all? And that's something that I think has come through several times in terms of what Gareth has just presented us, right? It's always that thing of why are we doing this? Why are we collecting this data? And if we don't know those things, it becomes very unmotivational, but also we don't give good data as a result of that because we don't understand ultimately how it is going to be used. So anyways, do check that out. I will share the link with you all after the call. Moore, did you have any brief updates on 360 Giving that you wanted to share?
Not a lot. We launched the Insights tool, as some of you have been, on Monday. So that is now live, and we are taking every comment, and we already implemented some on the functionality. So now you can basically upload any 360 Giving file, including Retina file, and see everything nicely in a report. And I think we have 2 more community foundation publishing in the pipeline, so we're working with them in the next month. And we're going to have a 100 publisher announced on Thursday, so that's going to be a big surprise. So that is nice to start to have 100 like groundmakers publishing. But I was really happy to see 3 community foundations on Monday. So thank you for coming. It was really nice.
Great. So as you've noticed, we had Tom last time, we've had Gareth this time talking about challenges in their work and learnings that they've had on key focuses. I would love to get another online discussion in before we have our face-to-face workshop, and just wondering if anyone would be willing to talk about their work more deeply on the next call, if I might get a volunteer.
Yeah, I don't mind doing it if no one else wants to.
And I just had to say,
I was just going to say something.
Well, you know what? No, but let me just.
No, really, Steve, go on.
No. Wait. Because we've had 2 boys. Not that we are that focused on people's genders, but it would be great to have a woman voice. I think in this would be good.
I was joking. I have nothing that I want to share at the moment.
Yeah, well, I'll be hitting you up later on.
Oh no, I'm gonna really have to think hard. Yeah, it's good.
But Nicola, we can. I can hit you up in a little bit about what that might be more deeply. I think what you've laid out in your priorities are probably good, rich subject matter.
Sure.
And just to say that the first thing I'll be doing is also sharing a doodle with you in terms of time that we can do it. And between now and our April 5th.
Great.
And thank you. I'm grateful that you volunteered.
Thanks.
The other thing to say, so the face-to-face workshop, if you haven't seen it, I hope you have, that we are actually going to do it at the UKCF offices. I suspect it is in the room that Gareth is in now.
No, but this one will be way too small.
It's not in the room. It's not the same room.
The one up that way.
It's that other room that we use. So it's not the one that will shut its lights off on us if we are not moving around. So we'll be at the UKCF offices. Andy and Adam have made a request for it to end by 4 o'clock. And so what I am thinking in terms of, I've put the schedule down there to say that what we will do at 4 o'clock is we will move to one-on-one clinics and planning sessions. So those of you that can stay till 5, we will work out with you how you are going to do what you need to get done. And then Andy and Adam and anyone else that needs to leave at 4, we can follow up with and do that one-on-one then. I hope that works for you, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just train logistics. I mean, 4:30 for me would be about right. Just as long as there's a bit of leeway there, that's fine.
Yeah, and believe me, I do want to make your travel home as smooth and uneventful as it possibly can be, because we want to make sure you come back, and that also you don't have a completely stressed out Friday night, because Lord knows I know what that's like, being on a train and getting really stressed out on my journey home. Great. Anything else more? Is there anything else that I am missing before I move us on or adjourn?
No, I think we're good.
You guys, thank you so much. This has been such a great discussion. Gareth, really appreciate the
My pleasure. Thanks for listening to me waffling on.
That was not, I mean, I think you did a really good job of laying out a whole bunch of, factors and things like that. And it got to where I wanted to in terms of the data standards or data sharing, which is, it's not about data sharing. It's about communications. It's about understanding those questions and being clear in terms of the asks and what you were going to be doing with the data.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Definitely.
Great. This has been recording. I'll be sharing notes and stuff later, and also share the Greg Bloom stuff. And with that, I will say goodbye. Bye,
Great.
guys.
Have a good week, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.
Cheers.